intellectual disability, a lot of people that we serve will have other disorders and intellectual disability. So they may have autism and intellectual disability or cerebral palsy because of the impact of those other disorders on their cognitive functioning. But intellectual disability just in itself would be significantly sub-average intellectual functioning, and in addition to significantly impaired adaptive skills. And then those disabilities or those deficits have to appear during the developmental period. So not, when you're 30 years old, but prior to age 22. Autism is a social communication disorder, and so that affects the way people communicate, the way they process their environment, the way they process interactions, and that they're able to take in information, but then also communicate it back.
Hey everybody, this is Tony.
And this is Paul, and we are headed out on the road for the Friends for Life podcast world tour. So let's hop in the car and get going. THS Remote Supports is clearly focused on improving independent living through dynamic and personalized services. Their systems have been carefully developed and perfected to ensure that everyone receives the best care through the least intrusive means possible. Located in Cincinnati, Ohio, they've spent over 20 years providing in-home supports to individuals with disabilities. If you or someone you know is looking for a remote service provider, go to thsrss.com or call 513-882-9088.
So, a doctorate of psychology. What made you want to choose that? That seems like a very intense and difficult path. I had a friend, and when we started college together, he wanted to be a psychologist, and they told him how long it would take. He's like, I think I'm going to be a police officer. He didn't do it.
Right.
So why?
Well, so I got bachelor's degrees in college in criminal justice and psychology. And by the time I finished college, I pretty much knew I wanted to do something along those lines, be something in both fields. And so my first thought was the FBI really sounded interesting. And I thought that might be a job that I would do well at. And then I saw the government pay scale for those positions for FBI agents. And I was like,
I'm good.
Yeah. So I thought about law school. I decided that really wasn't a route I wanted to take. So, people really interest me, pretty complex.
Yes.
When you think about complexity, I don't know if there's much else that is more complex than, kind of dealing with people and figuring out the motivations and how people are affected by different things in their lives. And so I went to graduate school to become a psychologist.
Yeah. And are psychology and criminal justice usually that closely tied together? Because it seems like everybody I know down that path, they have the interest in like both of those.
Not that I'm aware of. They're pretty different. So part-time now, previously full-time. I have done a lot of work for the courts as a psychologist doing evaluations. And one of the challenges is always, psychologists in the legal field, the legal system, talk in different languages.
Okay.
And so how to explain things in psychological terms for people in the legal system is, part of the challenge.
So everybody I know who has a doctorate of some form or another, they're always in high demand. They always have like 50 things that they do at once. How did you get here? Like what path led you to?
I'm not one of those people. Very low demand.
Good.
No.
Yeah. I think that's a good thing.
I've kind of always had about 3 different jobs. I actually always have had 3 different jobs as a psychologist. So I started out in private practice full-time, but I worked self-employed in 2 different jobs. I was in a small private practice doing therapy with mainly teenagers who have gotten in trouble with the legal system. So my referrals would come from probation officers and children's services caseworkers. And then I also do evaluations for courts at another job. And so I did that full time for about 10 years. I decided that wasn't something that I wanted to do 100% of my work time.
Gotcha.
I just, I didn't want to get burned out on working with offenders, 50 hours a day or 50 hours a week, excuse me. And so, I've always had an interest in working with people with developmental disabilities. I have quite a bit of experience, kind of non-professional experience, working with people with disabilities. And so that's always been an interest of mine. And so, when the position came open with Montgomery County Board, I felt like it was a good opportunity to make a switch. So now I work full-time for the county board, and then I still work very part-time at my other 2 jobs. Yeah.
Have you seen how your position is needed in other county boards by coming to this one? Or did you have a previous predecessor that you took over for?
Yeah, so there have been a couple different psychologists at this county board. The position was vacant for, I think, about 1.5 years or 2 years, and before I filled the position. There aren't a lot of county boards, or very few county boards that have a psychologist on staff. I don't know the exact number, but I know psychologists at probably 3 or 4 other county boards. In talking with them, we've heard that there's another board that has a psychologist on staff. Other county boards will contract with psychologists or just refer people to the community, for the psychological services.
So as a psychologist working for a county board, what is your role consist of, since it does appear to be a limited role? Like, how do you fit into that picture?
Yeah, sure. So I have my title is Director of Clinical and Behavior Support Services. So I oversee our Behavior Support Services program, which we're also lucky to have behavior support specialists who specialize in that. They're on staff. Most county boards have SSAs who have to fill those responsibilities. We also are lucky to have one of the only county boards that has in-house mental health services. And so I oversee the mental health program now also. And we have several therapists who provide individual and group therapy. So those are my 2 primary responsibilities, to oversee those programs. I also provide consultation for our eligibility department when there's cases where they're reviewing files to determine whether someone is eligible for county board services, and there's some question about what they're seeing, then they will send those to me to review and provide my opinion. There's some documentation that requires psychologist or physician signatures that the SSAs have to submit for example, waiver funding. And so I review records and complete and sign those forms for them. So those are the main responsibilities. I occasionally would conduct guardianship evaluations or other psychological evaluations with the individuals directly.
Now, it's very interesting, the mental health dynamic of this, because there's a lot of people in our field who have dual diagnosis. And to have someone in-house that can help, alleviate and show where to go instead of having 17 different appointments to try to figure out how things are. How does the county fund that? I mean, because I'm assuming that we're talking about Medicaid and Medicare funds that are being transitioned, or do I have that wrong?
Yeah, so a bulk of the cost of our program is funded by our budget. And so we have a shared levy in Montgomery County, and so there's been a commitment to make that part of our county board's budget. But then we also do bill Medicaid for services. So for the individual and group therapy, for community psychiatric case management services. So we are a Medicaid provider. We are certified through the Ohio Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services as a certified provider, and so that allows us to provide a wider range of billable services.
So throughout the whole startup and into where we are now with the whole COVID thing, have you seen a lot of stresses on people's mental health? I mean, I can only imagine how changed everyone's lives drastically overnight, essentially. But then especially with a community of people with disabilities, I can imagine it had quite an impact.
Yeah. So it seems to me like one of the primary impacts that it's had on people is loneliness. So I think a lot of us experienced feeling of isolation and separation, when, everything shut down. But then a lot of us have gradually worked back into, kind of doing more of what we used to. For a lot of the people that we serve, either that hasn't happened or it's happened a lot more gradual. And so and then they also, just because of the COVID and then just changes in the system, I think it takes more work for them to connect with other people that we serve. The past couple of years, we've had far fewer large social gatherings for the people that we serve. We have a really large and active recreation department, and so it's just been very different in the past 3 years for how they network and connect with each other.
Yeah, it's been difficult for a lot of people. I went from working in an office to pretty much working at home by myself 24/7, which for me isn't terrible because I'm kind of a loner. I'm totally content just sitting at my computer all day and grinding away on video editing and stuff. That's totally fine. But I could, a lot of people are a lot more social than I am.
Yeah.
And so I think that
that is me. I'm a social butterfly. I like to be around people. I like to converse. I like to be able to explore avenues of understanding. And it's easier for me to do it in person versus on Zoom.
Right.
Ugh.
Yeah, it is different on Zoom.
It's not as fun. So what are some of the most common, from a psychologist standpoint, what are some of the most common developmental disabilities that you see overall? There's got to be trends of some things are more common than others.
So I'd say probably the two top diagnoses that we, who people have that we serve is going to be intellectual disability and autism. There are a wide range of others, cerebral palsy, and there's a lot of genetic disorders and just a long list of others. But those are probably the two most common ones that we see.
Making sure that individuals are reaching the goals they have set for themselves. That's one of the many goals of Assured Health Services. If you're looking for a residential care provider or searching for ADS services, Assured Health is your go-to place. Assured Health, helping others succeed. Learn more at assuredhealthohio.com or call 419-442-8066.
And with people, I think the general public doesn't really have a grasp on how these things are different because they hear developmental disability and they just think generally someone who has Down syndrome. That's what they think. And it's not even remote. It's not all the same. So what's the difference between, say, an intellectual disability, autism, and, say, cerebral palsy, the three things that you brought up? Because I personally don't even really have a in-depth understanding. I know they're different, and I know they affect different parts of the brain and how they interact. But what are the major differences?
Well, so intellectual disability, a lot of people that we serve will have other disorders and intellectual disability. So they may have autism and intellectual disability or cerebral palsy because of the impact of those other disorders on their cognitive functioning. But intellectual disability just in itself would be significantly sub-average intellectual functioning, and in addition to significantly impaired adaptive skills. And then those disabilities or those deficits have to appear during the developmental period. So not, when you're 30 years old, but prior to age 22. Autism is a social communication disorder, and so that affects the way people communicate, the way they process their environment, the way they process interactions, and that they're able to take in information, but then also communicate it back. Okay. It's much more complex than that, but just very basically. And then cerebral palsy affects the motor skills, the motor functioning, and can also affect cognitive functioning. But there's also people who don't have intellectual disability. They are, fairly high functioning cognitively, but have cerebral palsy.
And I could just imagine how frustrating that would be as someone with a severe physical disability and they can't express themselves like you or I would when we can talk and tell people things. Do you see that? Do you see a lot of mental health because of that frustration?
So we see mental health and kind of behavioral reactions to frustration with communication. So it makes me think of our behavior support specialists. A large part of what they do is work with people on communicating more effectively. So if someone with autism, let's say, is having, engaging in some behavior that's very maladaptive, it's just not, a lot of times that's because they're not able to communicate what their needs or their wants are. And the way they do that is to act in some way behaviorally that's not really effective or going to get them what they want, or is causing some other problems in their life. And so working with the staff on how they should interact with the individual, when the individual may display certain behaviors, trying to interpret what that means, what they really want, and then how to communicate with the person to help them get what they want. So that's it.
There's so many instances in which I've seen people just, I guess, give up on folks because they didn't want to take the time to learn how this person communicates, and they're quick to pass pills, I guess is the way to really put it. How do you feel in regards to how much pill pushing we should do versus self-reliance on development through consistency? Like helping an individual learn how to cope with their anger management versus giving them, a pill to say, okay, calm down, or a PRN of some sort.
Right. I think it's important to accept people where they are and to work with them wherever they are, whatever, and I'm not talking about location, I'm talking just wherever they are with their functioning and the way they're reacting to their environment, or the way that they're dealing with things, the way that they communicate. And so I think that's really important to understand where they are, that sometimes when they, exhibit certain behavior, it's not personal towards staff. It's because they don't know a better way, a different way, or they're not capable of communicating in a way that's going to be what you and I are more used to day to day. So there are some times when medication can be helpful, but I always think that medication alone is not going to be as effective as medication and the social and emotional support that they're going to get from their staff, their providers. That's just critical. I also think it's important for people, that work in this field to understand that the rate of change, the rate of improvement is going to be different.
Correct.
And so it's going to be, you just have to have more patience. It's going to be a lot slower in some circumstances for some people. And that doesn't mean they're not making progress. It just means that they're going to not make progress as quickly as we may hope or we may expect from someone who, doesn't have the disorders or the challenges that they have.
Yeah, and I think, like, as humans, I in college, I studied anthropology because I had a similar interest. Like, humans are just really interesting, and they're just, like, the way they interact with each other is very interesting. And, I noticed that people tend to think that just because they do something a certain way, everybody feels that way, when that's absolutely not the case.
Right.
Like, it's insanely wild to, like, think. If you're just, like, look around the room, you're like, every single person has, like, thoughts going on in their brain like I do, but they're absolutely 100% different. Right. And to think about that, like, even driving down the road, you'll see a house. Like, there's a whole person living a life inside that house like I am inside my house. And it's kind of creepy to think about all these, like, individual thoughts roaming around, like, autonomously. And it's hard for people to relate to that. And it's even hard for me. I know that. And it's hard for me to relate sometimes because it'll be like, my brother is a math genius. He's an engineer, and I'm a podcast host. I can barely do base level math, but he can, like, do these complex equations. But do you think that a lot of these things are due to interest, or is it just a way that the brain neurons connect? Because that's something I think about a lot, is like, is my brain incapable of, like, doing complex math, or do I just literally not care about doing complex math? And that, like, on a broad spectrum, that's everyone. How do you think about that?
I don't.
You should.
Yeah, that's way too
He
complex.
said way too complicated.
I keep it more simple than that.
What is
That's a really good question, but I don't.
Keep it simple, stupid.
Right.
Like, it's just, like, why does he have that proclivity to be like, oh yeah, I just like math's cool, and I'm like, I would much rather never look at math in my life.
Right.
But
So for me, it's kind of that nature versus nurture. And I think it's always for everybody both. It's just for some of us it's more nature, for some of us it's more nurture. And that nature and nurture is always different for every person, even, siblings raised in the same household. It's going to be different. Both of those factors are going to be different. You and I could experience the same things in our household if we were siblings, and we would deal with that. We would process that differently, And so that's, I think, the lovely complexity of people is that, that's kind of why we're all different, is because we're all impacted by our nature and our nurture in different ways. And we start off in both of those two realms differently also.
Right.
Yeah.
The eligibility process, exactly how would that go? If I'm a parent of an individual with a disability, and let's say we don't even have a waiver yet, like how is that process?
Sure. So they would contact the county board. So we have an eligibility department. Every board is going to have people who handle eligibility, and they would complete an application. That application includes a lot of basic identifying information, some personal history on the individual that's applying for services, and then it's also going to require some documentation for evidence of the disability. And so once our board receives the application, then we have staff who reach out to them to collect other documentation that's necessary. And then, once it's established that the individual has a qualifying diagnosis, then there's an assessment process that the individual goes through to determine if they have functional limitations in a certain number of areas. And if they do, then they would qualify for services. I don't work in the eligibility department, so they would probably watch this and be like, oh no, that's really simplified, Dr. Kid. You didn't do us justice. But that's the nuts and bolts of the eligibility process.
The Reliable Drug and Alcohol Testing Clinic is a leading provider and convenient source of pre-employment and occupational type testing. Their clinic provides services to a wide range of private businesses, healthcare facilities, and municipal and county courts. Reliable is an independent, locally owned clinic. As a result, they provide their services at a lower cost than the major hospitals, have faster turnaround times on test results, and eliminate the long waits typically incurred at these larger facilities. To learn more, visit reliabledrugtest.com. Now,
is there another eligibility process in order to be helped with the mental health side of it because it is so different, or has Montgomery County put it all together?
So in our county, with our mental health services, the individual has to have already been found eligible for county board services.
Okay.
And then we accept referrals. Usually we get them from SSAs.
Okay.
So those referrals usually come from SSAs. If, let's say, an individual wants our services, or a family member wants services for that person, or a provider, then they can contact us, but we're really going to start with our SSAs because they're the coordinators of the services. So that's how we get the referral. Then we would determine if it's an appropriate referral. So if the person does have mental health problems, and if it's something that our staff is qualified to work with them on, then we would, get them set up. If it's an area that we don't provide that service to, let's say, for example, substance abuse specific
That
treatment.
was actually on my mind.
Was it?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask next.
Not a psychologist, a psychic.
Yeah.
Oh, they're
So,
not the same thing?
no.
Hold me now. Have mercy.
So that's just one example. That's kind of a really easy example.
Yeah.
Or if there's something really specific that we just don't have the staff that are trained or qualified to provide, then we would help connect them with resources in the community.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Good.
So I don't know how at liberty you are to talk about this with your job, but have you over your career, as vague as possible, have you seen any like really interesting psychological cases that you're like, this is just a weird way of like a person's brain working at like a different level?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Well, good one.
Yes.
Can you give like an example of like how, even if it just made you like be like, wow, that is just a strange way that the human brain wired itself or something?
Yeah, probably not.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough.
Respect it.
I figured you wouldn't be able to without breaking any laws, but I figured I'd ask anyway. Does working with people with disabilities or people in the criminal field make you think differently sometimes about the way like the human interacts, like the brain works?
Not so much how the brain works, but I'm probably a bit more suspicious just because of my, past experience of working with people in the legal system. And, I think that I've learned not always to take things at face value, but to make sure that I'm I try to be detail oriented. And so that's really important. And even, applied to this job, it's important to really pay attention to the details where on the surface, it may not be obvious that somebody's having a certain struggle. But then when you really pay attention and as you look at the fine print, then you start to see evidence that might not be so obvious.
Yeah, because that's the thing is like, just because someone doesn't have a physical disability doesn't mean they can't have intellectual issues or disabilities beyond that, because someone could look completely physically normal and they could have a severe mental disability or something, because I think people don't realize that it's like all or nothing with everyone, especially like nowadays. It's like someone is all or nothing, this thing or the other. And I don't think that they don't realize the nuance of like the human brain and how a human functions. So how would you let somebody know that in like simplistic terms? Because you can talk about disability all day, but people don't realize that that's a thing until it affects them personally. We've pretty much found across the board.
Right. Well, one of the things I think is important to understand is that we have these diagnoses, we have these disorders, and there's certain criteria that you have to meet to, be given a disorder, a diagnosis. But let's say, for example, there are 10 symptoms. To meet the criteria for that disorder, you may only have to meet 5 or 6 of them.
Gotcha.
So there's no, people can have those in different combinations. And so if you take depression, sometimes people with depression may experience it very differently than other people. It's the same thing with, let's say, intellectual disability. People may have a low IQ, low intellectual functioning, but they may have some areas that they're really strong in. And they have some areas that they're much weaker in. So I'll give you an example. I've learned that in giving IQ tests, I'm not the best just eyeballing it, that eyeball test. I can administer the test, but I'm not the best at predicting where somebody's going to fall.
Gotcha.
Now I know that if they're not, if they're borderline or mildly intellectually disabled, I know that they're not functioning at an average level, but there's different levels of functioning, kind of different categories, and it's really hard just to talk with somebody, and even during those tests before I score it, to be able to very accurately predict where they're going to fall. I mean, there's been a few times where I've given IQ tests and the person, I was like, yeah, they're not going to qualify. Like they seem like they're too high functioning for their, to meet criteria for intellectual disability. But then I score the test, and what I realize is that their verbal skills were good. And so it's kind of like what you were referring to, where you can talk with someone and just the way they look physically, and even sometimes when you talk to them, they may have decent verbal skills, but they're really struggling in other parts of their life. And they may really kind of function low in certain areas of cognitive ability, even though their verbal skills are strong. And when you have someone who you don't see a physical disability and verbally they seem like they are pretty strong, that can be missed. The limitations that they truly have can be missed.
Yeah, and it's funny because I know people who are insanely high-performing people that are autistic, but you would not associate how they act in public or whatever with your typical autism, like what's the word I'm looking for? Like traits. The autistic, like they don't have bad eye contact. They'll hold an hour-long conversation with you, and I don't know. I mean, again, it's a spectrum of stuff. There's autism, Asperger's, all of this stuff, and you would never know that. I did not know this until I've been told in person by them, and I was like, you would never. But it comes out as like extreme high performance in every aspect of their life. I have to be the best at everything I do, and you're just like, well, this person's very driven, and they're like, no, I have autism and I can't turn it off, and it's driving me insane. So like that's things that I'm starting to notice, because you're just like, oh, well, look at this guy. He just works really hard. He's like, I can't not work hard.
Right.
I have to do this all the time. And they're struggling. Like sometimes someone with depression has trouble getting out of bed, and they're like, I can't sleep because I'm thinking about this project that needs to go.
Right.
It's like, it's just wild to think about how the human brain is just like this big sweeping thing. Like somebody can't get out of bed, somebody is like up till 4 a.m. typing an essay.
Well, and it's interesting that there seems to be finally and slowly recognition of what people with certain disabilities can contribute. Like there's kind of this stereotype that if they have a disability, if they have a developmental disability, they're not going to be able to work.
Right.
That's bunk. And so I was reading an article a couple months ago online about an AI, artificial intelligence company that specifically looks for people with autism, because they are better than people without autism with certain tasks that are required for that job. And I think that's awesome first. But I also think it's really interesting how there's certain things with the way their mind works that may be a hindrance to them in some settings, but it's a clear strength to them in other settings. And for companies and just society to recognize the value that everybody can contribute is really neat to see. And it's kind of like, finally.
Yeah. And it's super impressive too, because it's like, if I have a friend that's super into photography and I'm super into photography, we both love wildlife photography. We use the same camera, we go to the same place, take the same picture of the same animal, and I'm like, why are your pictures always so much better than mine? Like, I will sit in Photoshop Lightroom for 7 hours on one photo. I was like, oh yeah, I definitely do not do that. So that would, but I mean, that's a strength. Like, that's world-class photography.
Right.
In the same circumstances for different people, their mind works differently, and that's so intriguing. So I feel like we've dove down a bunch of rabbit holes, but now it's time for a little fun. Tony, hit it.
And that time is rapid fire. I didn't even want to do the drum roll, but
you screwed that up so bad. I love that. It's a game show.
Yeah, it's a game show. We do a Would You Rather format. Whenever
Do you know I applied for Wheel of Fortune?
Really?
And I didn't get on.
Well, this is your next best thing.
I sent in like five little postcards to try to get on, and I didn't. So this is my moment.
This is your big moment.
Although I watched Wheel of Fortune a lot, and I would play the little computer game a lot, and so I thought I was decent at it. I have no idea what this game is, so I would not apply for it if I'm horrible.
This is better than Wheel of Fortune.
I'll just ask you some questions.
Because you can't be wrong.
And you say which one you want to do, and he can be wrong. I'll judge.
So there are wrong answers to this?
Only to me.
So I was feeling pretty good about this until like 30 seconds ago.
If you don't like the way it's going, you could like hyper analyze Tony and make him feel bad about himself.
I am because of the drum roll.
I already thought that he was going to do it. I'm like, man, he's going to.
He got in your head before you even did the drum roll. I like this guy.
All right, Doc. Here we go. Would you rather vomit on your personal hero, or have your personal hero not like you as a person?
I would rather vomit on my personal hero because I could explain to them that I was so nervous and so excited about getting to meet them that was almost some way, in some twisted way, a sign of respect.
Hey, look,
And admiration.
I love it.
That's a good answer.
And if they don't like me as a person, there's nothing I can do about that.
Yeah, except vomit on them. You can always.
But that's both of them. You didn't give me. It was not an and. It was a
You can
or.
do it.
Yeah.
But you can always still do it.
Sure.
Yeah.
If you cheat at the game,
Would you rather? This is the best start for rapid fire that we've ever had. I love it. All right. Would you rather communicate with only emojis or screaming whenever you talked?
I don't like emojis. I'm kind of anti-emoji, so I'd much rather scream. Even though I don't like screaming
I'm going
either.
to say I can't imagine you even screaming.
Yeah. Well, that's the dilemma for me with this question. But if I am forced to pick one, I would say scream. Even though because I don't talk very loudly, I would go hoarse pretty quickly, which would save everybody from having to listen to me screaming. But I'm not a fan of emojis.
Oh man.
And I don't like it when I have to put colon and then in parentheses that I'm actually using that in text, and it automatically makes a smiley face.
You can't even get in them.
And I have to figure out how to undo it.
Look, every time. All right, lastly, would you rather open your eyes in a heavily chlorinated pool or open your eyes in the ocean?
It's kind of going to have the same effect on me. It's going to burn. So it doesn't matter. One, I could see probably more light in the pool. In the ocean, I probably not see.
Yeah, I'm worried about the sand in the ocean. You know, more of the salt. It's the sand that kicks up. I've had it happen.
You're adding to it, though. You just said in the ocean. Like if I dip my head off of a boat, or if I've been standing there for 5 minutes and the sand settled. If the sand is twirling around, then that would be a different answer. Just like if
It's like Sharknado.
like if there's a little kid who has to go to the bathroom in the pool, I'm probably not going to choose that one either. You know, so I'll pick the ocean any day over that.
Identify every variable in the scenario.
Yes, like I think
If
we
the
can
pool
have a
waters
whole,
turn green, then I'm opening my eyes in the ocean.
perfect.
Well,
This has been perfect.
I think
Sharknado was a great movie, by the way.
I've seen at least 3 of them.
Yeah, there's like 5 or 6.
Yeah.
Watch the rest. It's
Yeah,
just more of the same.
Look,
Just in a different city.
There you go.
never seen any of them.
He disappoints me this way every
Okay, let's put it this way.
Yes, thank you.
When you get home from doing work all day,
Is there
So
somebody
back to
else?
what we were talking about.
when you get home from working all day, do you go home and read more psychology books all the time? Is that what you do for fun?
No.
So
I
if
usually work at one of my other jobs.
See, so when I get home from working with cameras and staring at a computer all day, do I want to watch more people do things on TV? Absolutely not. That's the last thing I want to do.
If you watched Sharknado,
You would.
you would probably feel differently.
All right. Well, this is a zero-sum game for me. So everybody hates the fact that I don't watch movies. It's like destroys Tony's well-being every time I talk about that.
It does.
I watch documentaries like a nerd. Okay. I'll admit
Documentaries
it.
are good.
I like documentaries.
I do
love
too.
those too.
Wildlife documentaries because that's what I do. But anyway. We really want to thank you for coming in. It was awesome. I learned a lot.
Yes.
I stumped you with my weird psychedelic question, I guess. That was like, I don't know. My brain works weird, I guess.
It didn't stump me. I just
No, it stumped me.
see it differently.
Yeah, it was a weird question. But either way, if if people want to learn more about your work here, where do they go? I mean, just the board website. I don't know how much you want people to contact you is what I'm getting at.
Well, anybody's welcome to contact me. And if I can't answer the questions, I will do my best to get them in contact with whoever is going to be more helpful than me. So starting with the county board website or calling the main number would be a good place to start. Our board website has a lot of really useful information. It's pretty simple to navigate. And so people are going to be able to find out a lot of information just from going to the website. But if they have questions, then they can call whatever the contact person is in the page that they're looking at, or they're always welcome to call me.